Chapter 20 of The Film Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Film Mystery by Arthur B. Reeve. Chapter 20. The Banquet Scene. For once I qualified as a prophet. We were hardly in our rooms when the telephone rang for Kennedy. It was District Attorney McKay calling in from Terrytown. "My men have positive identification on one of the visitors to the Phelps home the night after the murder," he reported. "Fine!" exclaimed Kennedy. "Who was it? How did you uncover his trail?" "You remember that my deputy heard the sound of a departing automobile? Well, we have been questioning everyone. A citizen here who returned home late at just about that hour remembers seeing a taxicab tearing through the street at a reckless rate. He came in to see me this morning. He made a mental note of the license number at the time, and, while nothing stuck with him but the last three figures, 3 6s, he was sure that it was a maroon taxi. We got busy and have located the driver who made the trip from a stand at 33rd all the way out and back. On the return, he dropped his fare at the man's apartment. The identification is positive." "Who is it?" Kennedy became quite excited. "Werner, the director." "Werner?" in surprise. "What are you going to do?" "Arrest him first, examine him afterwards. I've sworn out the warrant already, and I'm going to start in by car just as soon as we hang up. I thought I'd phone you first in case you wanted to accompany me to the studio." "We'll hurry there," Kennedy replied, "and meet you." "Outside?" "No, up on the floor." "You'll be there 15 minutes to half an hour ahead of me. I hope there's no way for anyone to tip him off so he can escape. We'll stop him if he attempts it." "Good." The courtyard of the studio at Manton Pictures Incorporated was about the same as upon the occasions of our previous visits, except that I detected a larger number of cars parked in the enclosure, including a number of very fine ones. Also, it seemed to me that there was a greater absence of life than usual, as though something of particular interest had taken everyone inside the buildings. The gateman informed us that Werner was working in the large studio. We made our way up through the structure containing the dressing rooms and found the proper door without difficulty. When we passed through under the big glass roof, we grasped the reason for the lack of interest in the other departments about the quadrangle. Here everyone was gathered to watch the taking of the banquet scene for The Black Terror. The huge set was illuminated brightly and packed, thronged with people. It was a marvelous set in many ways. To carry out the illusion of size, and to aid in the deceptive additional length given by the mirrors at the farther end, Werner had decided against the usual one large table arranged horseshoe-like, but had substituted instead a great number of individual smaller tables about which he had grouped the various guests. The placing of those nearest the mirrors had been so arranged as to give no double images, thus betraying the trick. The waiters, all the characters who walked about, were kept near the front toward the cameras for the same reason. It seemed as if the banquet hall was at least twice its actual size. I saw that Millard had arrived ahead of us. Either the changing of the scenes in his script to fit Enid had not taken him very long, or else the photographing of this particular bit of action had proved sufficiently fascinating to draw him away from his work. I wondered at first if he had come to the studio to use his office here, an infrequent happening from Manton's account. Then I realized that he was in evening dress. Without doubt, he planned to play a minor part in the banquet. His presence was no accident. Then I picked out Manton himself from our point of observation in a quiet corner selected by Kennedy for that purpose. It was evident that the promoter had cleared up his business at the office rapidly since we had left him there to go to our quarters on the Heights and had departed immediately from the latter place so as to precede the district attorney here. Manton, as well as Millard, was in evening dress. A moment later I recognized Phelps, and he too wore his formal clothes. In an instant I grasped that Werner actually was saving money. Not only were these officials of the company present to help fill up the tables, but I was able now to pick out a number of the guests who were uneasy in their makeup and more or less out of place in full-dress attire. They certainly were not actors. One girl I definitely placed as the stenographer for Manton's waiting room at the studio. Then other things caught my attention. I could not help but doubt the stories of waste told us by Phelps as I looked over the scene before me. The use of the mirrors to avoid building the full length of the floor did not seem to fit in with the theory that Manton and Werner were making every effort to wreck the company deliberately. I watched the financier for several moments. but did not detect anything from his manner except that he seemed to feel ill at ease and awkward in makeup. I picked out Millard again, and this time found him talking with Enid Fay and Gordon. Immediately I sensed a dramatic conflict, carefully suppressed, but having too many of the outward indications to fool anyone. In fact, a child would have observed that Lawrence Millard and the leading man needed little urging to engage in a scuffle then and there. Though Stella Lamar was dead, this was the heritage she had left. Her touch had embittered two men beyond the point of reconciliation, the husband who had been and the husband who was to be. Of the two, Millard had far the better control of himself, however. After a brief word or so, Gordon left them. At once I could see the relief in the expressions of both the others. Again I wondered just what might have been between these two. It was an easy familiarity which might have been as casual as it seemed to be, no more, or which might have been a mask for something far deeper and more enduring, the schooled outer cloak of an inner perfect understanding. Werner was by far the busiest of those waiting in the stifling heat beneath the glass roof. He was in evening dress, prepared to take his own place before the camera, and in straight makeup, so that he looked nothing like the slain millionaire, the part he had played in the opening scenes. I saw that he was a master in the art of makeup. I was sure that he was more nervous than usual. It struck me that he needed the stimulus of the drug he used, although later I knew that he must have felt intuitively the coming of events which followed close upon the attempt to photograph the action. As more of the people hurried up from the offices and around from the manuscript and other departments, very conscious of their formal attire, and as the regular players changed and adjusted the makeups of these amateurs, the banquet took on the proportions of a real affair. The members of the cast were placed at the table in the foreground. Enid, Gordon, Marilyn, and a fourth man were assigned locations, after which Werner proceeded to fill the seats in the rear. With the exception of Millard and Phelps, none of the inexperienced people were allowed to face the camera. Manton, whose features were familiar through published interviews and many publicity campaigns, was placed to one side opposite Phelps. Millard was given charge of a group containing a number of giddy extra girls in somewhat diaphanous costume, and seemed to be in his element. The tables themselves were prepared with perfect taste. I could see that real food was being used in order to achieve a greater degree of realism, for a caterer had set up a buffet some distance out of the scene from which to serve the courses called for in the script. Many of the dishes were being kept hot, the steam curling from beneath the covers in appetizing wisps. The wine, supposed to be champagne, was sparkling apple juice of the best quality, and I don't doubt but that before the days of Prohibition, Werner would have insisted upon the real fizz water. In details such as these, the director was showing no economy. "All ready now," Werner called, stepping back to a place at a table which he had reserved for himself. "All set? Remember the action of the script." Instantly the buzz of conversation died, and everyone turned to him. "No, no, no," he exclaimed in vexation. "Don't go dead on your feet. This is a banquet. You are having a good time. It's not a funeral. You were all in just the right state of mind before, and you don't have to stop and gape just to listen to me. Keep right on talking and laughing. My voice will carry, and you can hear without getting out of your parts." I turned to Kennedy to see how the picture-making struck him. I saw that he was watching the two girls at the forward table closely, and so I faced about to follow his glance. Marilyn's face was red with anger, while Enid, calm and rather malicious, was ignoring her to devote all attention to Gordon. The leading man, bored and irritated, made no effort to conceal a heavy scowl. In the momentary interval following Werner's instructions, Marilyn lost all control of herself. "If you will pardon me, Miss Fay," she cried out, in a voice which carried over to us, and with cutting accent upon the miss, "I think that in this scene at least we should both be facing the camera. If I understand the scene in the script at all, it is intended to show the conflict between the two women over the one man seated between them. Jack Daring is to be swayed first by Stella Remsen, then by Zelda. At least this once, I think the daughter of old Remsen and his ward are playing roles of equal importance." For a moment I smiled, realizing that Marilyn was not going to let Enid take the picture away from her as we had seen the new star do in one of her first scenes with the leading man. Then I sobered, realizing that it was the outer reflection of the deep-running passion of these people. The cloud of Stella's death was over them still. Enid responded, but in tones